Good afternoon, everyone. Now, for next 3 days, we are going to have EEG webinar. Every day we are having two speakers. So today, Dr. Neeraj Baheti will talk on montages, localization, and polarity. And Dr. Siddharth Kharkar will talk on normal EEGs and benign variants. So to introduce Dr. Neeraj Baheti, he is presently working as a consultant neurologist and epileptologist in charge of Comprehensive Epilepsy Center at SIMS, Nagpur. He's a gold man. He has received gold medal in MBBS, MD. So now the gold reaching to 50K, I think is the richest man member. He has done his DM Neurology and Fellowship in Epilepsy from Sri Chitra Institute. His special interests are pediatric and adult epilepsy, electrophysiology, and critical care neurology. He has 44 publications in national and international journals and 6 book chapters. Second speaker, Dr. Siddharth Kharkar, is a neurologist working at Wockhardt Hospital, Mira Road, and Mumbai Central, and also is a private practitioner. He worked as assistant professor in Division of Epilepsy, Department of Neurology in Birmingham, Alabama, USA from 2014 to 2015. He did his MD residency from Georgetown University, Washington, District of Columbia, USA, and did his neurology residency from Drexel University, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He is editorial board or reviewer of many journals, Annals of Neurology, Epilepsy Research, Neurosurgery, and Journal of Neurosurgery. He is invited a section editor for Neurology, Journal of Clinical and Medical Case Reports. In 2011, he received Best Resident Research Project Award. 2010, he was selected as the National Neurology Resident Scholar Program for Epilepsy Training. In 2008, he has received Humanitarian Resident of the Year Award. In publication, he has more than 18 manuscripts, 1 book chapter, 14 international platform, and poster presentation. So I request first speaker, Dr. Neeraj Baheti, to begin with his talk. We have 60 minutes. Roughly, we'll divide 30 minutes for both of them. We'll have talk first and then a question answer session where we are trying to show few easy pictures which in form of quiz, and that can we cannot actually have discussion, but we'll try to give answers after those quiz are shown, and that's how we go ahead. Neeraj Bhai. Thank you.
Good evening. My screen is visible?
Yes, it is visible.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Anand, for that night's introduction. And thanks for inviting me for this talk. This is the opening lecture in the Fine EEG webinar series, which will go over next 3 days. And I'll be speaking on montages, localization, and polarity. The rest technical aspects of EEG electrode placements, filters, digital EEG archiving, and rest of the things will be taken care by Anand himself when he is taking artifacts tomorrow. I'll start with my talk on this montages, localization, and polarity. We all know we follow this international 10-20 system of electrode placement. And we are seeing over here Jasper and the two doyens who published this international 10-20 system of electrode placements. The way we divide it, the system is divided as from nasion to inion, and from bilateral both pre-auricular region, we divide these into segments of 10% bilaterally and then 20-20 each. And then we go ahead and start placing electrodes across the midline on both sides, and then laterally 10% each side, that is FP1, FP2, and then 20 each on the other side. That completes it. So we have the central midline chain, which starts from nasion. 10% is FZ, then 20% is CZ, then PZ. Then from anion, 10% above, we laterally we have each 10% O1, O2, then T5, T6, T4, T3, F7, F8. These are the lateral chain. Then the paracentral or parasagittal chains are the, from FP1 we go back as F4, C3, C4, P3, P4. And then apart from it, over the mastoids, we put the A1, A2, and the ground or reference is put between FP1 and FZ. So that's the way we place the electrodes. And this is, the nomenclature is such that the prefix is the location, frontopolar, frontal, central, parietal, and temporal. The suffix is odd number is left, even number is right, and midline is Z. This is all what we all know otherwise. And the numbers are, when we move towards the midline and anterior, they are the smaller number, like F3, F4, we know it is anterior parasagittal, P3, P4 is parasagittal posterior. And as we go laterally, the number is F7, 8, F8 are anterior temporals or posterior frontals, then T3, T4 are mid temporals, and T5, T6 posterior temporals. So numbers are larger laterally and posteriorly. Now we connect these electrodes in a particular fashion. That is the input of the first, like FP1, the sequential electrodes are connected. For example, like FP1, FP2 to F8, F8 to T4. So each connection, that is FP2 to F8, is known as a channel that displays the voltage fluctuation between the single pair of electrodes. And then we have a montage, which is a collection of this, one second. Yeah, montage, which is a collection of channels displayed in a logical order. So we have, based on how we connect these electrodes, we have two derivations. That is, one is a bipolar and one is a referential derivations. Bipolar derivations are such that we connect the consecutive electrodes, and the way how we connect, it can be further longitudinal or transverse. I'll go with it. The way it is, FP1 is connected to F3 and F3 is connected to C3 and C3 to P3. So we'll have connections like F3 will be common for FP1, F3, input 2, F3 will become the input one of the next channel, that is F3, C3, and so on. So we sequentially connect from anterior to posterior, parasagittal chain, then lateral chain, and then the midline chain. So based on whether we connect longitudinally from anterior to posterior or transverse, we have two montages, that is longitudinal and transverse montage. And so this is the classical longitudinal double banana, what we say, or the transverse montage, which is there. And these are the sequential electrodes which are connected. And basically the representation is such, we have first left central or right, then right central, left transverse, left temporal chain, then right temporal chain, and then the midline chain. That's the way we arrange the longitudinal montage. And similarly, we have a transverse montage where we arrange this first FP1, F2, then the anterior temporal, then midline, and then posterior, and then O1, O2. So these are the way the channels are represented. One more montage which we don't use routinely, but one should be aware of, is a circular headband, which we say anterior or posterior circular headband. When we have an abnormality which is restricted to anterior or posterior electrodes, and in this longitudinal, because of this end of chain or beginning of chain, we are not able to appreciate it proper, we can go for a circular montage, which makes it very clear whether it is originating for FP1 or FP2, or sometimes if it has a field and it is visible on FP1, FP2, we are not able to make out, then we can go for this sort of a montage, which is usually in teaching institute we use sometimes, but not in day-to-day practice. Then we have a reference montage where each electrode is weighed against a reference electrode. The reference electrode is believed to be an inert electrode with which has a value almost considered to be near zero, but we all know it's not possible. We are all living masses of protoplasms, and there has to be some charge to it. So we go for as inert electrode as possible to be selected as a reference electrode, and based on that we have different referential montages. So compared to the previous where we connected the adjoining electrodes, here we connect the input 2 is a constant, which is a reference electrode. And A1, A2 is the one where we connect the ipsilateral ear electrodes. The problem with A1, A2 is it is susceptible to artifacts like EKG artifacts, some myogenic artifacts, and so it becomes difficult. And most common epilepsy we know is temporal lobe. So if the field of temporal, the discharges is wide, then it may happen that it might contaminate our A1, A2, which is a reference in itself. The field might be involving A1, A2, and which might not give a best picture. but still it is one of the commonly used montage. Then we have midline or CZ. CZ is far away from the peripheral electrodes. It's not susceptible to myogenic artifacts. It is a good montage, especially if we wish to see temporal discharges against the reference. But the problem is with CZ is sleep is an integral part of our EEG. And in sleep, the maximum activity is in the midline, that is FZ, CZ, PZ area. And so the contamination of the CZ happens. And so that's not a good montage for a sleep record. So the next montage, which is again commonly used after a longitudinal double banana or longitudinal montage, bipolar montage, is common average montage. What happens is in this common average montage, we take the average of all electrodes, and against that baseline average, each electrode is weighed. So taking an average of all, it comes to almost near zero. And then we have an active electrode which is connected, and the electrode stands out against the background reference if it has a very active discharge or active potential. Sometimes we may go for a Laplacian average where we wish to see a particular area abnormality is there, and again adjoining electrodes are connected with that, and that might accentuate the difference in between those areas. Basically, we use either or montages. The way we are taught, the way we have learned, the way we are comfortable, we can use the montages. And the best part of digital EEG recording is we can reformat montages, which was not possible in those previous analog machines where we had those paper recording. So any electrode pair can be, after this is a post-processing, once we have recorded a EEG with all the electrodes connected, we can reformat and change the montages. And usually whenever there is a doubt, we change the montage and we look into both the one or two montages to confirm our findings. How this digital montage reformatting is done is each electrode is taken against a reference small point, and then the difference is taken between this A minus R minus B minus R, that will become A minus B. So each electrode is weighed against reference which is recorded by the machine. And then we do the post-processing, whether we are doing real time then and then or after the recording is done, we do the montage reformatting. That's the best part of digital EEG, that we can always go back, check the montage and see again. Like if we have this longitudinal montage where we have FP1, F3, F3, C3, C3, P3, basically the machine records it as FP1R, F3R. And then when we do the montage reformatting, it changes it, and the way we wish to create a montage, we can create in a particular scenario. That's also possible. Key points regarding montage: choice of montage is important. As I told, midline we will not prefer when in sleep record. Somebody has a temporal lobe epilepsy, A1, A2 might not be preferred. The best montage, usually majority of us, we use our longitudinal bipolar and maybe common average. But again, in common average, issue is if there is a widespread field of a particular discharge or potential, it may contaminate our common average also, and the record might not be very good. So in that case, we can go back to again longitudinal bipolar and see where the activity is originating, and we can localize it. So whenever you are in doubt, we can view in at least two montages. Example, this is a longitudinal bipolar montage. We can see over here, this is the left central, right central, left transverse, right transverse. Over the right temporal, left temporal and right temporal. Over the right temporal, we can see some rhythmic delta activity is seen, some 2 Hz delta activity is seen, especially over the FP2, F8. It's not very well appreciated over F8, T2. T2 is what we use in video EEG, that is anterior temporal additional electrode, which is not routinely used. So when we change this to average, it is very well appreciated because F8 and T2 were close by. In the longitudinal bipolar, they cancelled each other, so it was not very well appreciated. In contrast, it was seen over FP2 and F8 because the field was not extending up to FP2. So as soon as we change the montage to average montage, it is very well seen. It is seen at F8 T2, that is anterior temporal, a rhythmic polymorphic, rhythmic monomorphic theta, delta rhythm, temporal intermittent rhythmic delta rhythm, which is very classical seen over there. Sometimes we can have multifocal discharges. Over here we can see over left temporal, right temporal, then right central. So again, to appreciate this sort of multifocal discharges, we can change the montage to average montage, and they are better appreciated And we know these are all in different locations at different times. So these are independent actively discharging foci. 3 foci are there on the single page. So again, many times based on what the abnormality is, we can change the montages and we may be able to reach to our conclusions better. Now going to polarity. Basically, the slide is not coming well. We have basically what we are recording, or we are connecting the 2 electrodes and then we are connecting and getting a record out of this. But the scalp activity we record is in between the scalp and brain, there is a bone, and the activity is very low amplitude in microvolts, and we are trying to capture this activity. And otherwise also we are living masses of protoplasm, we are alive, and we have many activities which are going on. It could be ECG artifact, it could be muscle related myogenic activities, and those discharges can contaminate, and they are bound to contaminate our EEG recordings as such. To avoid that, because those are very high amplitude potentials which are there, and on the background of that we are trying to get those tiny signals which are submerged on the background of these top mountains of this electrode recordings, or environmental noise, or noise which is originating from other parts of the body. So to subvent that, we have something called as common mode rejection amplifiers. What they do is, otherwise we expect that both will be isoelectric or flat line, because both will submit, and the 2 electrodes which are connected, they will just minus out. What happens is, using the differential amplifiers, it just deletes the noise from both the adjoining electrodes, and what we get is the recordings which are just originating from the brain, and minus the environmental and the noise from the other different areas. Just to say, these are the 2 elephants standing, which are the environmental noise, or the noise which the other areas of the body is generating because of electrical discharges. And on this, we wish to just measure the potential difference of the 2 adjoining electrodes, which are just very minute. So what we do is, we connect them, and after connecting them, we delete the noise, and what we get is a good record. Like, this is a noise in input A1 and A2. We expect that it will be a flat line. But if on the background of this noise, there is an abnormal discharge, what will happen is, the noise will get cancelled and the abnormality will stand out. The electrical potentials originating from the brain will stand out. So that's the function of differential amplifiers. Now, what are the EEG polarity conventions? Going up and going down. Going up means what it means to us. So when we connect input 1 and input 2, something which goes up, it means that input 1 is more negative as compared to input 2. So something like, if line 1 first electrode goes up, it is negative, we say it is line up. So if input 1 is negative compared to input 2, the output will be surface negative, or it will be going up. It's not this, because polarity is not that they don't measure the absolute potentials, but they compare the potential of the first electrode to second electrode, and based on whether the first negative electrode is relatively positive or negative, you'll get the output. Whether it is, if it is relatively negative, it will go up, that is L1, or the first electrode is negative, it goes up. So I'll just give a few examples. In the first one, if it is negative, it will go up. If the first one electrode is positive compared to the second electrode, over here it is a plus and it is 0. So it is positive compared to second electrode, the deflection, pain deflection will go down. Fewer examples. If the first electrode is -2, second electrode is -1, we know -2 is more negative as -1, it will go up. Again, if the first electrode is plus and the second is double plus, we know single plus is minus compared to the double plus. So again, it will go up. The first is negative compared to the second one. So again, it will go up. Again, if it is very much negative compared to the second electrode, it will go up and the amplitude will be much more. Again, if it is minus and one is plus, again, it will be very high amplitude. So based on the potential difference between the 2 electrodes, it changes. And if the first electrode is negative compared to the second one, the deflection will go up. And if the first is positive compared to second, it will go down. These principles are important when we go to localization and when we wish to localize which area of the brain the discharges are coming. So if we have to say, we'll say if first is negative, it will go up compared to second. That's it. If we remember this much, it is good enough. Now, if both are same negative, what we expect is a flat line. If both are positive, again, it will be an isoelectric line. The deflection won't be there. So if something is there, if a potential discharge is there, which is equally involving the both electrodes, then we summate it, it will be just isoelectric. It will not be seen on both the things. But it doesn't mean that both the electrodes are zero. It is just meaning the deflection, the abnormal potential is equally spreading to both the adjoining electrodes. And when we summate it, the potential difference comes to zero. And it doesn't mean that the absolute value of this each electrical recording is zero. So a flat line will simply mean the voltage fluctuations of each electrodes are the same. It doesn't mean that both the electrodes are zero. So a key take home point regarding EG polarities, if something we see as minus 80, it could be all these four combinations possible. That is, electrode 1 is minus 80, second is 0. Or electrode 1 is minus 120. Again, the second output is minus 40. So minus 120 minus 40 is minus 80. Again, first is 0 and second is plus 80. So the difference will be minus 80. Or the first one is plus 40 and second one is plus 120. The difference will be plus 40 minus 120, that is minus 80. So based on this polarity, we can just say the first input is negative as compared to second input. It doesn't mean the first input has absolute value negative or absolute value positive. Again, it doesn't mean that if we see minus 80, the first has a minus 80 absolute potential. It is just the comparison between the two electrodes that we see the polarity. Now going to localization, what we are recording is the electrode recording from the scalp, and the electrode potentials are generated deep inside in layer 5 of pyramidal neurons, and the discharges are, the source is there, and then a sink is created because of extracellular potentials which are due to the terminal ends of these dendrites, that extracellular postsynaptic potential and intracellular postsynaptic potentials are generated, and these, because they are radially arranged, they are summated, and the summation of these potentials together, it give rise to a summated discharge which is being picked up by our EEG electrode. It's not a single electrical discharge, and it is said that at least around 6 centimeters square of area has to be depolarized to see a discernible waveform on a surface EEG. Now again, based on where the discharging focus is and where our electrode placement is, it will influence the recorded EEG signal. If it is on the top of this crown, bang below our recording electrode which is placed, we'll get a very high amplitude discharge or very high amplitude potential. If it is little to the side, we know it is oblique to our discharging focus, we'll get a low amplitude potential. So it doesn't mean when we record something over FP1 or F7, we cannot be very sure that it is originating just below F7. So based on rest of the properties like amplitude, field, then we come to know which area of the brain it is coming from and how it is. So the factors which influence will be distance from the distance of the recording electrode from the brain, the volume conducting properties, if there is some subdural effusion or those sort of thing, again that can affect, and the orientation of the recording electrode to dipole is the most important point. Like if some discharge is happening at the crown, so which is majority of the time we see, and that is directly propagate to scalp, we see a very good quality discharge we'll see, and it produces majority of our EEG signals, and overlying electrode detects the maximum potential because it is bang on over it and it is perpendicular to it, and only one pole is detected because it is perpendicular to it. And as I showed in the previous figure, there is a dipole which is sink, and the dipole is there, so only one pole is detected over the scalp. Majority of the time in our spike and wave, we get the negative potential over here, and the positive pole we say is deep inside. But sometimes it can happen the depolarization is in the depth of sulcus or in the ascending gyrus, so it can give rise to either tangential or horizontal dipole or oblique dipole, and the field what we get on scalp may be very distant from the area of actual origin of this electrical discharges. So, and if it is very deep seated inside, sometimes it becomes very difficult. It might not be detected on the scalp. And again, the maximum potential, because if it is oblique, it will be reflecting to a distant electrode which is tangential to it, and the potential may be actually away from the site of generation. And again, it can happen if it is a tangential, we may see a positive dipole because it's not perpendicular, it is oblique. So a tangential positive dipole can be seen at some other distant electrode. These all things are important because when we want to localize a particular discharge, this all helps us. Basically, the problem with EEG has a good temporal resolution but poor spatial resolution, and there is a problem with there is an inverse problem with EEG. We get the discharge, and based on discharge we go back and try to localize from where the discharge is coming. Like for example, if we have this temporal discharge, we know it can come from lateral temporal, mesial temporal, hippocampus, it can come in from insula, it can come from operculum, all these areas in and around that to this sort of discharge. So when we mean to say, okay, it's coming from temporal lobe, we know it can be originating from all the areas in and around. And similarly, when it is an oblique electrode, when the discharges are coming and we record it at centrotemporal area, for example, in BRE, we know the focus actually is very deep inside and it's near the operculo-insular area or those areas it may be there. So although it helps us, it cannot be very sure that 100% okay, this is originating from these particular areas. And apart from amplitude, the phase reversals, the morphology of it, the field of it, these all things help us in localization of this electrical discharge on scalp EEG. So first principle of localization will be, as I told, it's a summation of this excitatory postsynaptic potential at the terminal dendrites. It is a summation. So at least 6 centimeter square of synchronized cortical activity is recorded. To be recorded on scalp EEG, it has to be at least 6 centimeter. So if it will be at least 6 centimeter, at least it will involve 1 or 2 adjoining electrodes. If we see a particular activity restricted to a single channel, I mean, so it can be something which is at C4. So when we see in longitudinal bipolar, it will be F3C4 and C4P4. So again, F2C4, C4P4. So adjoining electrodes only seeing, and C4 is the common electrode, then I know it has to be mostly extracerebral or artifactual, because if it would have been intracerebral, very rarely it happens that if it is a central electrode in between, it's not involving the adjoining electrode. So if there is no field on surface EEG, assume it as an artifact, because whenever we have a discharge, it will be a summation and it has to involve all the adjoining electrodes. There are some exceptions to it, we'll come to it. So how we localize on a bipolar montage? Something like if a discharge is coming from C4 alone, this is hypothetical, FP2, F4 won't be isoelectric, but this is just to, so that you get a feel of it. So something is coming from C4 isolated. So F4, C4 and C4, P4. So F4 is positive as compared to C4. If it is positive, F4, C4 will go down. In C4, P4, C4 is the first electrode which is negative. It is negative, it will go up. So what happened is there is a phase reversal at F4, C4. So if it is a phase reversal at F4, C4, C4, P4, C4 is a common electrode. We know the activity is coming from C4 electrode, and that way phase reversal helps us to localize in bipolar montage. Very rarely it will be that it is very restricted to F4, C4, it will have a wider field. We'll have these examples. Many times the notion is if there is a phase reversal, it is a spike or it is a sharp wave, it is an abnormal discharge, it is an epileptiform discharge. It doesn't mean phase reversal does means there is a change of direction of potentials across this electrode. There is some activity which is being generated at 1 or 2 electrodes adjoining, and because of that there is a deflection which is either going up or down. So any form of waveform may have phase reversal. It could be C4 electrode artifacts. It could be in sleep that we have C4 and midline CZ. Those areas we have phase reversals when we see the vertex waves. Or it could be pathological phase reversals when interictal discharges. Sometimes in this electrographic seizures also we see some phase reversal. It's not a biological phenomenon. As I told, because we see the potential difference, not absolute difference between the electrodes. And that's the reason we see the change in the direction. And it's just so that our eyes pick up that area, we know there is some disturbance going on, that's the way it should be looked at. It should not be looked as abnormal always. It could be physiological, it could be artifactual. Majority of the time, as told, if it is a C4 electrode, a C4 area, there is a discharging focus or abnormal discharging focus, it will have a field. Maximum is C4, then F4 and P4. So there is a field to it. So now when we see it is FP2 to F4, FP2 is positive compared to F4, so it will go down. F4 C4, F4 is relatively positive, minus 20 compared to C4, it will go down. C4 P4, C4 is negative plus minus 40 compared to P4, it will go up. And again P4O2, P4 is negative compared to O2, it will go up. So we had again a phase reversal at C4, but because of this field, we know this area, this discharge is coming from this frontocentral area with a wide field, and the epicenter is around C4. So that way phase reversal help in bipolar montage to localize. Again, we can have a discharging area which is equidistant or which has an equal field across F4, C4. So when we record FP2 to F4, FP2 is grossly positive compared to F4, it will go down. F4, C4, they are almost equal potential, it will be electric. C4, P4, C4 is more negative, it will go up. And P4, O2, again, P4 is more negative compared to O2, it will go up. So apart from phase reversal, in this case, the isoelectric channel will tell us, okay, from where this discharge is coming. So it is coming in between somewhere F4 and C4. That's the reason it is summated and it is isoelectric. So it is involving the F4, C4 maximum, and there is a field up to P4 also. Sometimes it can happen because we are connecting anterior to posterior. It can happen if the discharge is coming from P4O2 or FP to F4, because FP2 doesn't have any electrode anterior to it. So we won't get, we will get a spike, but then we won't get a positive deflection there. And similarly, P4O2, if some discharge is coming from just O2, like O2 is minus 70, when we see P4O2, P4 is positive as compared to O2, O2 is negative, it will go down. So when a discharge is coming purely at the occipital, which is very rare, usually again, you go page by page, many of them, they will have some field to C4, P4, and it can happen C4, P4 also is going down because P4 is negative compared to C4. And so you can have the discharges going down. So if P4O2 or C4, P4 are the areas, P4 and O2 are the areas which are involved, and it is the end of the chain, you may just see a positive deflection over there that tells us, okay, because there is no electrode beyond O2, that the discharges are coming from the posterior head region. In this particular example, it is coming from O2. So no phase reversal may be seen if it is a beginning of chain or end of chain. In those cases, we can go for that circular montage when we are learning or somebody we are teaching, and then our eyes gets used to it and then we can pick up. And again, another way is to change the montage that we routinely do, and we go for referential montage many of the time. Like in the first case where there was a C4 discharge which was very focal, if we see in referential montage, amplitude of spike helps us. It is just located over C4. C4 showed a surface negative discharge compared to the average. Again, in the previous one, where it had a field of F4, C4, P4, F4 is little negative, C4 is maximum negative, P4 is little negative. The maximum amplitude is at C4. So we know the epicenter is at C4 with a field from F4, C4, and P4. Again, the previous example where it was having equally involving F4, C4, we see against average, F4 and C4 both will have same amplitude. We know the amplitude is almost same across F4 and C4. So it is, the field is somewhere between F4 and C4, and it is equally involving both F4 and C4. Again, P4 referential montage, if sometimes we have to, if there is a phase, that is not there. If there is a phase reversal in referential montage, it can happen. Like I told, A1, A2, these temporal electrodes are not very good if the discharges are coming in temporal areas. Like in this, the discharge is coming from T4 electrode. And what is happening, the field is such that it is involving A2 also. So T4 is minus 70. The field is such that it is involving A2, and A2 is becoming minus 20. So it can happen if it is involving or contaminating our average electrode. you can see T4, A2, it is going up, and rest of the electrode, because A2 is more negative compared to the rest of electrode, it can go down. It can show positivity. So it may look Haywards to us. In those situations, you can again change in this sort of cases where we are seeing that, oh, A2 is a common electron, that's the reason it is showing positive discharges. You change to CZ, you change to common average, and then you can localize it. So sometimes phase reversal could be due to contamination of reference electrode, or phase reversal could be because of tangential dipole, that will come to it when we go for some examples of Rolandic epilepsies. We'll go to these examples. What we are seeing over here is a midline central, left central, right central, then this left temporal chain, right temporal chain. FP to F8, it is going down. So again, F8 is more negative. F8 T2, not isoelectric really, little going down. So it tells me, okay, T2 is more negative compared to F8. And again, T2, T4, it is going up. So T2 is negative compared to T4. So the phase reversal is happening across F8, T2, T2, T4. And with a white field, this is anterior temporal discharge, which is originating from T2 electrode. These are taken from our video EEG monitoring unit. We additionally put, apart from our FP to F8, F8, T4, we put T1 and T2 electrodes across the anterior temporal area in front of tragus to pick up this temporal discharges proper, which is not routinely used in our routine EEG monitoring, because it will lead to more contamination due to myogenic artifacts or artifacts related to masseter muscles and frontalis muscles. Again, over here, the T2, T4, in this, it is appearing almost isoelectric. So I know the potential is involving T2 and T4 equally. So anterior and mid-temporal area. And then the phase reversal, we see F8, T2, it is going down, T4, T6, it is going up. So again, it is anterior and mid-temporal focus, which is there. And almost equally, almost same involving T2 and T4. Again, one more sleep record, we can see spindles over here, left central, right central chain, temporal chains. What we are seeing over here is T3, T5 and T5, O1. T3, T5, it is going down. It is going down means T3 is more positive compared to T5. And T5, O1, it is going up means T5 is more negative compared to O1. So T5 is negative, it is going up. So the phase reversal is happening really across T5 electrode. So I'm not very sure, sometimes it could be the morphology, although it looks like a spike, it could be that it is an electrode artifact because it is restricted to this particular chain T3, T5, T5, O1, and T5 is the common electrode. In this sort of situation, we can go back and change the montage and see an average montage. In this case, but we are anyway seeing on the contralateral side also T4, T6, T6, O2. There is again a phase reversal over there. We'll change to the reference montage and see what is happening. We can see over here. T3 and T5, it is seen the maximum amplitude is over T5 and O1. It is seen the maximum amplitude is across T5. So we know it is a posterior temporal discharge, and it has some field which is going up to O2 also. Again, on the contralateral side, it is seen at T6, O2, and these are the classical discharges which are posterior head region discharges. So whenever in doubt about localization, we can change the montage, we can go back, we can reformat. That's the best way to look at it before we make any opinion whenever we are in doubt. Okay, now this is a sleep record. What we are seeing over here is this is a left central, right central, temporal and midline. There is a phase reversal which is happening across C3, C4 and CZ. Almost they are synchronous. These are broad sharp waves, not like routine spikes, but these are little broader than that. Broad sharp waves seen in sleep. Again, some more majority they are synchronous, some are asynchronous. On right side also again independent, but maximum is at C4 and CZ where they are phase reversing. What are these? Because it is being taught by many as whenever we see phase reversal, this is abnormal discharge and it is epileptiform discharge. We have to take into account the state of the patient, the morphology of the discharge, when it is occurring, what is the location of it. We know it is a sleep record. The location is midline and parasagittal central chain. These are the classical vertex waves. To see again better, we'll go to referential montage. This is the common montage which I use and majority of us we use apart from longitudinal double banana, where we can see over here the maximum amplitude is at C4, some spread to F4 frontocentral, again FZ, CZ, Again, on the contralateral side, F3, C3, F4, C4. So these are the classical vertex waves seen in sleep. These are not epileptiform. Just to re-emphasize, phase reversal does not mean spike discharge. It could be physiological, it could be artifactual, it could be pathological. It just tells me there is some change of potential occurring across those electrodes. Now again, sometimes it can happen as a discharge which is coming from deep inside or parasylvian or operculum. It can have a field which, because if we imagine a three-dimensional structure, something coming from a opercular insular area, the field will be going to midline central chain and the temporal chain, bidirectional if we think it that way. So you can see this sort of double phase reversal in our longitudinal bipolar, where F7 T3, T3 is negative compared to F7, so it is going down. T3, T5, T3 is negative compared to T5, it is going up. So it is phase reversing across T3. So T3 has an amplitude maximum. Then again, F3, C3, C3, P3, and P3O1. So it is phase reversing across C3. We can see over here in this discharge, F3, C3, C3, P3, and P3O1. So centrotemporal discharges are there. And these sort of discharges can be seen if it is focus is deep inside or in benign Rolandic also. I'll come to it in the next example. So the field is at the T3 maximum. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, Neeraj. We have these bags and everything to be discussed on next 2 days.
Yeah, I'll just skip it.
Yeah, if you can wrap up, because that is also waiting for this.
Yeah, C3, yeah. P3, the maximum amplitude is seen over here. Okay, I'll just skip up. Okay, end of chain phenomenon we have already discussed. Sometimes it can really happen that the discharge is originating from O2 alone. And because it is the end of chain, P4 is positive compared to O2, O2 is negative, it is going down. And we don't have any electrode beyond O2. We cannot see that phase reversal. You change to average referential montage, you will see active discharges surface negative across O2. Again, frontopolar discharges, FP1, F3, if it is just isolatedly coming from frontopolar area, as in this case, FP1 is more negative compared to F3, it is going up. Again, FP1, F7, it is going up. Although many times you will have a field, but sometimes in few cases, it could be just very focal anterior, anteriorly discharging focus, and you can have this sort of discharge. But again, it's very clear classical spike over restricted to FP1 electrode, seen in average referential montage, FP1. So localization principles, if we say EEG mainly detects the vertical dipoles near to surface, deep-seated will have a wider field. It can manifest both tangential dipoles can show to centrotemporal, and a positive dipole may be seen at the frontal, which we skipped it up. And it can be, if it is on the crown of the gyrus, the maximum amplitude will be seen, and it will be a very focal discharge, which will help us in localizing best. If it is a widespread, sometimes it could be misleading. Whenever in doubt, see on both bipolar and referential montage. Bipolar, we see phase reversal, isoelectric line, beginning or end of chain. Referential montage, amplitude helps us. And be aware with end of chain, otherwise you may miss it as a non-epileptiform, or miss it as, we will miss those spike and wave discharges. Do I have time to take the quiz, or should we go ahead with Siddharth?
I think we are short of time. We'll go ahead with next talk, and then if time permits, we'll take the question and answers. Okay. We have just 1 hour and we already spent around 45 minutes. So okay. Next speaker is Dr. Siddharth, who has done dual fellowship, one in epilepsy for 2 years at UCSS with Dr. Lowenstein, and epilepsy and the Parkinson's fellowship at King's College with Dr. Ray Chowdhury. So I, without wasting much time, I asked Dr. Siddharth to continue with his talk. That's benign variants and the normal EEG.
Right. So give me one moment. Let me set up share screen. EEG normal variants. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, Siddharth.
Okay. All right, so I'll start. My talk is about normal EEG variants, and I'm of course Dr. Siddharth Karkar. Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, very well.
Okay. All right. So when I say the normal EEG, this is the first topic I'll be talking about. It means the usual EEG, what you see in, let's say, 80% of EEGs, or at least more than 50% of EEGs. When you say variants, these variants are still normal, except they are seen in the minority of EEGs, so you call them variants. And these are various names, benign, epileptiform variant, something that looks like epileptiform discharge. But I think simple is better, so we'll just call them variants or benign variants. Just a disclaimer, I know there are some senior neurologists in the audience. I'll be very simple about this simple topic. I mean, no disrespect to anybody. I just want to make it as simple as possible. When you start looking at an EEG, it's very essential that you look at the EEG at a good setting. So these are good settings, the low frequency filter of 1 Hertz and a high frequency filter of 70 Hertz. So if you look back at some of Neeraj's slides, they had the same settings. Why is this important? Because muscle artifact can get converted into what looks like abnormal waveforms in it. And I just wanted to mention this to show you what muscle looks like. This is what muscle looks like. And as I show you a normal EEG, you will see these waveforms throughout, and those are just muscle. All right, so the normal EEG. This, as I said, this is the normal EEG, and Dr. Neeraj has described this in detail. So this is the bipolar montage. So if you look at me, this is the lateral chain. You're connecting FP1 to F7, T3, T5, and O1 all the way back. And then this is the paracentral chain, and then this is the one on top, the central chain, and then the chains on the right side. So this is the left side, the middle, and then the right side. And if this bipolar montage changes, I'll make sure to mention it, but otherwise mentioned, all the images I'll be showing will be in this montage. Let me, even though it will take up some time, let me go over how I write my EEG report, because it will give us a structure for the talk. So usually I mention the awake features in the first paragraph, the drowsy features in the second paragraph, the third paragraph is asleep. I mentioned the variants in the fourth paragraph and the abnormalities in the fifth paragraph. So these words should hopefully make more sense once I'm done finishing up with the EEG. So I'll quickly go through them. Initially, the patient was awake. The resting background was symmetric with a good admixture of frequencies. There was a normal anterior-posterior gradient and a reactive PDR of 10 Hertz. Later in the study, the patient became drowsy. This was accompanied by roving eye movements, loss of the anterior-posterior gradient, and the PDR became lower. The patient then fell asleep. Normal symmetric sleep architecture was seen, and I want you to remember this in this sequence. Vertex waves, K complexes, posts, and spindles were seen. Deeper levels of sleep are usually not captured in our study. Occasional wicked spikes were seen during the study. There were no epileptogenic discharges. There were no severe ECG abnormalities. So this is the normal EEG. This is what it looks like. As soon as you see the normal EEG, you can just make up your mind about whether the left side looks the same as the right side or whether it looks different. And they look about the same. So you say the EEG is about symmetric in this case. There is an anterior-posterior gradient. The front of the brain is involved in desynchronized activity, thinking about a lot of things all at one go. And there's nothing adding up. Masses of tissues are not firing off in unison. And because of that, the amplitudes don't add up. Actually, you get lower amplitudes, but you get a lot of fast activity. And this is this fast activity, the beta range activity. On the other hand, at the back of the brain, in the resting state, when your eyes are closed, you get a very nice resting rhythm. You get a very nice resting rhythm. And this is the most common rhythm. This is the first thing that is taught about in the EEG. This is the posterior dominant rhythm. I'll go over a few features about it. We talked about symmetry. Actually, the resting posterior dominant rhythm is asymmetric. It's more on the right side and less on the left side. If you want some way of remembering it, remember that I told you that active areas of the brain have lower amplitude. So maybe the left side is a bit more active than the right side and it has lower amplitude. That's not really true, but it's a good way of remembering it. There are some criteria for calling this abnormal. So if, let's say, for example, the right side is more than 3 times the left side, then you call it abnormal. If the left side is actually bigger and more than 2 times the right side, then you call it abnormal. But nobody uses this criteria. By the time that you reach the posterior dominant rhythm, you have already looked at the symmetry and determined that it is normal. So what happens to the resting rhythm of the occipital cortex when it's actually doing something? When it's actually doing something, when the eyes open, when it's looking at something, when it's seeing something, the PDR disappears. And then when the eyes are closed, it reappears. So eye opening leads to attenuation of the PDR. And when the eye blinking happens, there's a momentary increase in the PDR, and that's called an alpha squeak, but clinically that's not very important. What's important clinically is to realize that the PDR can change during the record. So you have this patient who has a PDR of, let's say, 10 hertz, and some of these waveforms appear notched, and suddenly that gets converted into 20 hertz. And this is a harmonic of the PDR. So this is a fast PDR. This is double the range of the normal PDR of the patient. And this is usually not mistaken because you see the fast rhythm at the back, but it's still sinusoidal, very smooth. So you're not going to call it abnormal. But certainly if you have a slow PDR, if you have a PDR that is half of that of the normal PDR, then you might think that this is occipital slowing. So what will save you? What will save you is the features we described. This will be half the normal PDR. It will change with eye blinks. As soon as the eyes are open, it should decrease. And once the patient goes off to sleep, this will decrease in amplitude. That was about the back of the head. Now about the front of the head has a lot of this beta activity. And beta activity, realize this, and this is on the right side, it is very different from muscle artifact. In fact, you can detect muscle, in fact, you can make out beta activity versus muscle artifact as we saw on the first slide. But certainly if you filter out muscle artifact enough, this beta activity, muscle artifact can look like this beta activity. So just be careful about that. To know the state of the person, I think one of the very useful things is to know about the eyes. And these are eye blinks in the frontal lead. So why are these produced? The front of the eye is positively charged. So when you close your eyes automatically move up and outwards. That's called the Bell's phenomenon. So the positive part becomes closer to the FP1 electrode right here. And so this will become positive as compared to F3. And therefore you will get this downgoing waveform, downgoing waveform, downgoing waveform. Every time I blink, I'll get this downgoing waveform because FP1 is becoming positive. On the other hand, we were talking about a wakeful person until now. Let's say he becomes a bit sleepy. So his eyes start moving from place to place, roving eye movements. And this is what normally happens. So what happens now? The eye, when it goes to the right side, it becomes closer to the F8 electrode. F8 is right here. And so FP2 becomes slightly less positive as compared to F8. Therefore, you get this upgoing wave. On the other hand, all electrodes on this side, so T4 will become less positive as compared to F8. F8 is the most positive electrode. So you get this positive phase reversal or an open window. Very simple way to remember this is wherever the window is open, that's where the eyes are looking at. So the eyes are looking to the right, 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 right. Here the eyes are looking to the left, left, and so on. So quick diversion, if I may. Just before the eyes are looking to the right, you are getting this small spike, and then the eyes look to the right, and their eyes to look to the right. What is that? That is a muscle. That is the lateral rectus muscle. So this is the lateral rectus spike. Sometimes you don't see it, sometimes you see it well. But that is one more evidence that the eyes are going to the right. This is a very nice EEG. Let's make sense of it. Initially, there is an eye blink. So I blink my eyes. And then I have very quick movements to the left, right? So I look here and then I move to the left. I look here, move to the left. I look here and move to the left. What is this? This is the person who is actually reading. So he's going to the end of the line, moving back. Going to the end of the line, moving back. Why am I going over these eye movements in so much detail? Because they're very clinically important to know the state of the person. And this thing could just as easily happen in nystagmus. So actually in an ICU EEG, you can detect nystagmus using the EEG. So you get these roving eye movements, you know the patient is getting drowsy. By the way, you know, your PDR is not getting lost, it's getting attenuated. And you are getting these things at the vertex right here, you're getting these waveforms, poorly developed waveforms. These are the vertex waves. And now you're going into stage 1 sleep. So what happens later? Once you go into well-developed stage 1 sleep, the PDR just disappears and you get these huge complexes that you know the entire head. Boom. And then you get boom. And these are big, huge complexes, and they are called K complexes. These K complexes persist. And towards the end of stage 1 sleep, and certainly into stage 2 sleep, you get this first variant waveform. This is so common that it's very difficult to call it a variant waveform. These are the posts, positive, occipital, sharp transients of sleep. And this word actually tells you most of what you need to know about them. They are positive and they are located posteriorly. Now, in any waveform that you see, as Neeraj mentioned, you're supposed to see the location, the state, and the average, and possibly change it over to an average montage. And these things are very important. So if you look at these waveforms, and these are again in bipolar montage, it's not very obvious that they are positive. So what do? you flip over to the average montage. And as soon as you shift over to the average montage, it becomes very clear that these are actually post-positive occipital sharp transients of sleep, seen in stage 2 sleep. And as you go deeper into stage 2 sleep, you get a short, very rhythmic sinusoidal patterns. So brrr, these are brrr, 1 second, 2 seconds, at the most 3 seconds. These are the sleep spindles. The vortex waves and all the features of earlier sleep will persist into stage 2 sleep. Then you come to stage 3 sleep and stage 4 sleep, what used to be called stage 3 and stage 4 sleep. But nowadays they just call it slow wave sleep. Basically, the amount of slowing is so much that you stop seeing most of the sleep architecture, and more than 20% of the EEG, and in much deeper level, more than 50% of the EEG is occupied by these slow waves. So we talked a bit about awake, drowsy, K complexes. So awake, drowsy, K complexes, sleep spindles, and deep sleep. And so a patient can move back and forth between these. He can go from this to this to this. And this is the normal variability of the EEG. There should be some variation in the EEG from place to place. What is reactivity? Reactivity is when you try to wake somebody up. He should wake up. He should have a change in state. He should change from sleep to wakefulness. Maybe he can have arousal pattern or some change. If he shows no change, that means the reactivity is reduced. These concepts are more important actually when it comes to ICU EEGs, because in an EEG that you do routinely in an OPD, that person most of the time is going to have normal variability and reactivity. So this statement, variability and reactivity was or were normal, you can probably skip it in most routine EEGs. So we talked about the normal EEG. I hope these statements make more sense to you. I'll take 10 seconds and go over it quickly. Initially, the patient was awake. The resting background was symmetric with a good admixture of frequencies. There was a normal anterior posterior gradient and a reactive PDR of 10 Hz. Later in the study, the patient became drowsy. This was accompanied by roving eye movements, loss of the AP gradient, and attenuation of the PDR. The patient then fell asleep. Normal symmetric sleep architecture, including, remember it in the sequence, vertex waves, K complexes, posts, and spindles were seen, and deeper levels of sleep were not captured. So that's the normal EEG. I'll talk about the EEG variants, and I'll talk about the EEG variants now in two separate categories. There are rhythms, so things that keep on going on and on and on for 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 5 seconds, sometimes 10 seconds. And then there are spikes, boom, boom, or some bursts, and then they go away. And so we'll talk about them in those two respects. Let's talk about rhythms first. I'll just talk about 3 rhythms: the wicket, the mu, and the Zeigarnik rhythm or the midline theta rhythm. The wicket rhythm is also known as the psychomotor variant, but a few years ago, the International League of Epilepsy said this term can only be used when you are really taking an examination and really want the student to do badly. So nobody uses these terms anymore. Where are these rhythms located? So I made up this diagram, and I know it seems like a lot, but maybe we can use it for reference. So these rhythms are mentioned here in a rhythmic font, if you will. So the wicket rhythm is in the temporal region, and we'll learn about that. The mu rhythm, just like the PDR, is the resting rhythm of the motor cortex. And just like the PDR, when the motor cortex is doing something, and what does the motor cortex do? Move your hand, or move your leg, move your hand mostly, move your face, or even when you think about movement, the mu rhythm actually disappears. The Zeigarnik rhythm is a midline theta rhythm, and it's a very interesting rhythm, and we'll see that it's not really one rhythm, it might be a combination of rhythms. So wicket rhythm, which is frequently confused, I'm sorry, we forgot to mention this, which is frequently confused with another rhythm called rhythmic mid-temporal theta of drowsiness. So we'll talk about these together. The mu rhythm, the resting rhythm of the motor cortex, and the midline theta rhythm. And we'll talk about the burst later. So first, the wicket rhythm. The wicket rhythm is the most common rhythm other than the PDR that you should know about. So the wicket rhythm is a very nice archiform rhythm. It's like this. So it's very nice, very beautiful actually. So the tops are curved, and here and so on. So here it's very easy to identify. It's located temporally. It's located seen in drowsy and light sleep, and you don't really need to do the average montage because it's kind of located in the middle of the head. So the trouble is when the rhythm is very short. So sometimes it can look like an epileptiform spike right here in the top of the page. So how do you distinguish this from a lateral temporal spike? You distinguish it by the morphology, like this. and the fact that they disappear in deeper sleep, and for that matter are not usually present in wakefulness. So wakefulness and sleep, this will disappear. Whereas epileptiform discharges, if this was to be epileptiform, it would actually increase in sleep. Most likely, most epileptiform discharges increase in sleep. So spikes in the lateral temporal region that disappear in sleep are probably wicket spikes rather than true epileptiform spikes. Something that is frequently confused with the wicket spike is the rhythmic mid-temporal T-top drowsiness. Now, as you can see, it looks like the wicket spike. It happens in drowsiness, but it is not as beautiful. You know, the tops are flat. They're not nice curves. On top of that, they have a ragged appearance, and this is probably because they're a combination of multiple waveforms. So there is some alpha rhythm in there, there is a theta rhythm in there, and therefore these are not very beautiful. Look at this one, for example. Sometimes these RMTDs, rhythmic mid-temporal theta of drowsiness, can be confused with seizures. So how do you differentiate it from a seizure? By their monomorphic nature. They look the same. All the waveforms kind of look the same with some variations. But really, one of the most important features is there should be no clinical features associated with this. So for example, if I get this waveform at the bottom of the page, and the patient, every time this happens, reports a feeling of something, let's say deja vu or some bad smell or whatever it might be, these are mesial temporal, but lateral temporal symptoms, I would think this patient every time is getting epileptic symptoms because of this region. So obviously this is not a normal variant, this is a seizure. So the part about not having any clinical symptoms is a very, very important thing about seizures, about normal variants, I'm sorry. This is the mu rhythm. As I said, this is the resting rhythm of the motor cortex. This is central in location around the C4 electrode. This happens when the patient is awake and not doing anything. But as soon as you see this rhythm, the technician can help you by asking the patient to move his hand. As soon as the patient tries to move his hand, this rhythm should disappear. And that is where a good technician actually helps, one of the ways. So midline theta rhythms, frontal midline theta rhythms. One of them is the Zeigarnik rhythm. Some people refer to all of them as the Zeigarnik rhythms, but really they're varied in the way that they're present. Some of them happen during drowsiness, some of them happen during sleep, and so on and so forth. Some of them happen when you're in drowsiness, some of them happen when you're doing something. For example, in 2016, a very nice group published this paper, you know, a normal waveform using smartphones. It looked exactly like the midline theta rhythm, which you used to call the Zeigarnik rhythm, except it was seen only when people were using smartphones. And the prevalence of this was very high. It was actually 25%. So, you know, you can try doing this in your EEG labs. You can have a person operate a smartphone and see if this midline theta rhythm appears. And the argument that they made is this is not the same as the Zeigarnik rhythm. It is different. So obviously one more group came up with something else. Now they said, well, we have discovered a patient who has this rhythm right here, which looks the same, only when she is knitting, and as soon as she stops knitting, it disappears. So the midline theta rhythms can be resting rhythms, can happen in drowsiness, they can be task specific, or they might not be relevant to anything. So the midline theta rhythms are very, very heterogeneous. They might not exactly be one rhythm, they might be many different rhythms. I'll talk about the breech rhythm quickly, but somebody else will probably address this. Normally, our skull is a filter for high frequencies. High frequencies don't make it out of the skull. But when there is a breach in the skull, for example, a craniotomy, high frequencies can make their way out of the skull. So for example, in this person who has a left frontal defect, in the left frontal electrodes, you are seeing this high frequency activity. You call this the breech rhythm, and it's controversial about what this is. Some people believe that this is actually a rhythm. It's a reflection of the mu rhythm, or it's a reflection of the wicket rhythm, or some other rhythm that you're now seeing because the skull is not there. Some people believe it's just cortical activity that you're seeing. So it's called the breech rhythm, but we don't know whether it's a real rhythm. EEG variants, I'll talk about spikes and bursts next. We talked about the rhythms, wicket rhythm, RMTD, mu rhythm, and Zeigarnik rhythm. Let's start from the posterior side. So we have the lambda waves, which happen while you're reading. We have the posterior slow waves of youth, which are self-explanatory. The 14 and 6 hertz positive bursts, which are seen in the posterior temporal and occipital region, have a fairly small field. But then you see this variant with a very big field. These are benign epileptiform transients of sleep, also called small sharp spikes. And lastly, we'll talk about 6 hertz spike and wave, which can happen anywhere over the brain. So lambda and PSWI first. So lambda waves, as the Greek letter for lambda would suggest, are triangular in shape. You see these triangles here? They happen when you are trying to do lateral searching movements. For example, when you're trying to read. So obviously when you're trying to read, you are awake. So when you're awake, I'm sorry, these are posterior when you're awake, and with lateral searching eye movements. Now, as Neeraj mentioned, these are at the end of the chain. These are right here. So to determine what polarity they are, we need to change over to a different montage. So this is another example of lambda waves. This is what it might seem like. Those were very prominent lambda waves, but this is what they usually seem like. 1, 2, 3.
Can you please use your pointer to show the waves?
I am using it. Are you not able to see it?
No, we are not seeing a pointer if you are using it.
I'm not.
Yeah, now we can see.
Now you can see. Okay.
Yeah, but it's still faint.
I'm very sorry. So going back, these were you're able to see it now? Okay. So these are the lambda waves here. You're able to see it now, Anand?
It's very faint actually.
Oh, very sorry. But the dots actually tell you where the lambda waves are on the right side of your screen. If you look in the occipital chain.
Against the white background, it is not very nicely seen.
Let me see. Now?
No, we need to search for your pointer.
Okay, here. This is better?
Yeah, this is better.
Okay. So these are the lambda waves right here. Okay. These are the lambda waves. This is better. So these are the lambda waves right here, right here. So what would happen to these lambda waves if we shift over to an average montage? As soon as we shift over to an average montage, we see that all of these waveforms are downgoing. That is, they are positive in nature. So they are positive, they are occipital, and they are sharp. And what else is all of these things? Yes, posts, positive occipital, sharp transients of sleep. So what is the difference between posts and lambda? Well, posts happen when you are asleep. Lambda happens when you are reading and trying to keep awake. So the difference between posts and lambda is the same as the difference between night and day. It's a very, very clear difference. Let's talk about posterior slow waves of youth. And when we say youth, we actually mean 7 to 20 years. So you see this posterior dominant rhythm at the back. But in addition to this posterior dominant rhythm, sometimes underlying we see these slow waveforms. And this is approximately 2 hertz. And this 2 hertz, these 2 or 3 hertz waveforms are not a subharmonic of the posterior dominant rhythm because they are too slow. But in all other respects, they are like the posterior dominant rhythm. So when you open your eyes, they do attenuate. As you go into sleep, they do disappear. The error that you might make is to call these occipital slowing, just like a slow PDR. To distinguish between the slow PDR and these posterior slow waves of youth is less important, but obviously the slow PDR is going to be half of the normal PDR, while the posterior slow waves of youth are going to be approximately sometimes 3 hertz and so on, but much slower than the slow PDR. Okay, so now we have finished these rhythms, the mu rhythm, the second rhythm. We have finished the lambda and the posterior slow waves. We'll go on to the 14 and 6 hertz positive bursts. So the 14 hertz pattern, these are 2 separate patterns. The 14 hertz pattern is the more common pattern. They are located posteriorly, as you can see from the diagram, and they're mostly in drowsy and light sleep. And again, because they're posterior, and you can see them here, this is a small burst of 14 hertz waves. You are supposed to put them in an average montage. When you shift them in an average montage, boom, it becomes very clear, it becomes very simple. These are posteriorly located 14 hertz positive bursts in the occipital region, and these are going to be non-epileptiform or a normal benign variant. And similar 6 hertz variants can be seen as well, except it's less common. So we finished the lambda, PSWI, 14 and 6 hertz, and we'll go on to beds. So now notice how wide the field of beds is. So even though they are also called small sharp spikes and they are small and sharp, as for example can be seen here and here, a magnified view of these spikes is here. they're small and sharp, except they have a wide field. They involve all the electrodes along the temporal chain. So why call them? So they're temporal. They have wide field. They're seen in drowsy and light sleep. But what makes you call them benign? We call them benign because they're very small. The duration is very short, 50 microseconds, and there is no aftergoing slow wave. So there is no slow wave after this. So you call them BETs or small sharp spikes. So lambda PSWI 1460 Hz BETs. Now we come to the most controversial variant, the 6 Hz spike and wave, which can be located anywhere in the brain. There are two short forms that you need to remember. One is VAM and the other one is FOLD. So VAM stands for awake, high amplitude, anterior, male. So these are the waveforms here. Now, males are kind of more dangerous than females. That's how I remember them. But these are anterior and these are high amplitude, and be very careful about them, because if they have embedded spikes, it can become very, very difficult to distinguish this from an epileptiform discharge in the frontal regions. And therefore, it's very controversial. Some people call something VAM, some people might call them frontal spike and wave, and some people might say, I don't know, but it seems to indicate a higher propensity for epilepsy. So some people just go ahead and say VAM is associated with epilepsy in some patients. On the other hand is FOLD. So FOLD is female, occipital, low amplitude, drowsy. So these posterior waveforms that you see here, they're low amplitude, they are seen in a drowsy condition when you don't have PDR. And these are mostly benign because females are usually benign. So that's how I remember it. So VAM and FOLD are examples of 6 Hz spike and wave, which earlier used to be called phantom spike and wave, but the ILAE, of course, has banned it. I think we have covered all the EEG variants. So we can cover in terms of rhythm, the wicket rhythm, which can be confused with RMTD, new rhythm, which is a resting rhythm of the motor cortex, the Zeigarnik rhythm, which is probably a collection of many different rhythms, the lambda and PSWI, which happen in the posterior region, the 14 and 6 Hz positive burst, and all of these you should place in an average reference just to see what is going on. The BETs, which have a very large field, and a 6 Hz spike and wave, which can actually happen anywhere on the brain. I can pass on this photo to you, and this contains everything, awake and drowsy and so on and so forth. And on the right, it contains examples of these waveforms. So, for example, this is a small sharp spike or BETs. So, bird's eye view, even though you might not remember all of these variants, what should you remember? Sometimes you're not able to identify a variant. Let's be frank. And even an experienced EEG person might not be able to identify a variant. So the number one thing is frontal variants are not very common. These variants change with sleep, and in sleep, most of the variants are absent. In contrast, epileptic spikes actually increase in sleep. Now this is very important. There should be no clinical symptoms with any of these variants. If you see a pattern that you are convinced is RMTD, but every time that pattern happens, the patient gets some lateral temporal symptoms, that is probably a seizure, that is probably not RMTD. And in terms of morphology, something that is monomorphic, like the whole PDR or SREDA, we'll talk about smooth sinusoidal waveforms. And if there is no disruption of the background, there is no aftergoing slow wave, there is no suppression of the background after a rhythm, it is probably a variant rather than an epileptic lesion. But remember this, and this will help you. So I have a few quizzes. So always remember, I have put this up for easy use. Always remember, notice the location, the state, and change the montage once. So what is the location of these spikes here? They're kind of phase reversing over the temporal regions, but they have a very wide field. What is the state of the person? The person is drowsy. And there's no need to change the montage because it's kind of temporal. And obviously, if you're not guessed this by now, they are BETs. Go on to the next thing. So this beautiful rhythm, this beautiful rhythm like this. Like this. Where is this located? It's located in the temporal region. What is the state of the person? Again, the patient seems to be, if you look at the O2, the patient seems to be drowsy. There are no eye blinks, nothing. So what is this archiform rhythm here? Very beautiful. It's the wicket rhythm. Why is it not the RMTD? Because it doesn't have flat tops and it seems to be only one frequency. Be very careful with this EEG because, Dr. Diwan has fooled me once with an EEG of this sort, he'll remember it. But what are these things here? So these things are frontal, these are happening right here. So what happens right here? Vortex waves happen right here. So are these vortex waves? Right here. Or is this a fragment of the Zeigarnik rhythm? No, if you look at the location, that's fine. But if you look at the state, the person is awake during this time. This is the PDR. So vortex waves are not going to happen when you're awake. In fact, if you look closely, there is an aftergoing slow wave after this. So this is actually an epileptic discharge. This is the midline epileptic discharge. So just be careful when you're interpreting variants. Make sure you know the state of the patient before you call something one particular thing. I have not covered certain variants because they're very obvious. If you can take 1 minute, I'll just cover them quickly. So this is hypersynchrony. It happens post hyperventilation. Sometimes it happens just after going to sleep and just after waking up. So you can get very high amplitude symmetric slowing, and this is hypersynchrony, hypnagogic, hypnopompic, or post HV, and it can last for a very long time. When you arouse somebody, when somebody is sleeping and you make a big noise, these arousal patterns sometimes can be very, very sharp. What saves you is if the technician actually mentions that there was this big noise and the patient woke up, that will save you and make sure that these are really arousal patterns. When you do photic stimulation, sometimes the patient will blink multiple times and this will produce a muscle artifact. That muscle artifact is called for photomyoclonic response. In the occipital region, there might be quick waveforms at the same frequency or at half the frequency of the photic stimulus. That's called photic driving. But certainly, if you precipitate generalized spike and because of the photic stimulation, that's called a photoparoxysmal response. So this response is abnormal. It can be seen in GNE, for example, but that does not mean the patient is going to have photic seizures. It just indicates a higher tendency for having a photoparoxysmal response. For example, most JME patients will have a photoparoxysmal response, but most don't have photic-induced seizures. I'll not go over this. And that's pretty much it. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for attending.
Thank you, Siddharth. It was excellent talk. We all understood the benign variants very well. That picture was excellent. I think if you can post it on the WhatsApp, that's a best
Can
picture.
I share it here?
Neeraj, can you put your EEG slides as quiz? There are many questions. More than 500 participants have already given many questions. So Neeraj, Siddharth, if you stop your sharing your screen, sure. Neeraj.
There you go.
Can you see?
Yes.
Okay. Coming to the first one, FP2 to F4. FP2 is -10, F4 is 0. Where will the deflection go? Up, down, or isoelectric? So FP2 is negative, it will go up.
Get it to positive, so up.
Up. FP2 is negative compared to F4, so it will go up. Again, FP2, F4, both are same -10. So whether it will be up, down, or isoelectric, it is the same. So they will cancel each other. It will be isoelectric. Again, third one, FP2 to F4. FP2 is more negative compared to F4, which is positive. So again, -10 and +10, it will go up, but the amplitude will be more compared to the first one where the difference was just -10. It will be -20. The amplitude is up and it will go up because FP2 is more negative compared to F4. Now FP2, F4, FP2 is positive, F4 is 0. So FP2 is more positive compared to F4. Where it will go? It will go down because FP2 is more positive compared to F4. So just these brief principles, if you remember, and the thing to remember is if first electrode is negative, it will go up. If it is positive compared to second, it will go down. One more EEG just to show you how reference contamination occurs. This is A1A2 or the A1A2 montage, referential A1A2 montage. And we are seeing a temporal discharge over here, T3A1, we can see over here. T3A1, T3 is negative compared to A1, it is going up. But rest of majority of the electrodes, it seems like A1 is more negative, the other electrodes are more positive, so it is going down. So a widespread field is there, which doesn't fit with our routine physiology. How come focal discharge will have such a wide field? If you see this sort of thing, you change the montage. I've changed it to common referential montage, where we take the computer in itself takes the average of all and then makes it stand for it. What we are seeing is the maximum amplitude is seen at T3, F7. Again, there is a field to it, but there is some field to A1 also. So the field was such that it was contaminating the A1, and A1 being the reference, it appeared that it was a second electrode which is grossly negative. So everywhere it was going down. So this we have to keep in mind whenever you are in doubt. The routine 2 montage we use are longitudinal bipolar and common average. If you're used to, and if you're using A1 or A2, this sort of a CZ montage, just keep all these things in mind, or this contamination may sometimes makes it difficult for interpretation.
There was a question when you will use a common average montage. I think this slide or this EG was a classical example for that.
Whenever in doubt whenever there is a very focal area of abnormality, like if it is involving FP1, F7, sometimes it may happen, the amplitude change across FP1, F7 might not be very well seen because difference will not be picked up. So there will be a mild deflection which is seen in FP1, F7 and F7T1. So in those cases, when you change it to average referential, it will stand apart from the background, because now you are checking this individual electrode to the average. Like over here T3 we could see, but F7 we were not able to appreciate. You can see F7 was very small spike. Yes, because A1 also was negative in this. So now if we see over here, it's very well clear. T3, F7 also there is a field, and A1 also there is a field. So in these sort of scenarios, you can change the montages. A phase reversal in montage means whether what it could be: artifact, true phase reversal, it could be contamination of reference. It could be either of these above. In referential montage, if we say it could be true phase reversal or contamination. But if we see in bipolar montage, it could be anything. It could be physiological phase reversal. It could be because of the artifact or those sort of thing. Somebody has asked the question, what is a true physiological phase reversal versus what is, I think there was a question, what is true phase reversal?
Instrumental, yeah, instrumental phase reversal.
What we're seeing in longitudinal bipolar is instrumental phase reversal, because the phase is changing across those electrode. And when we see a tangential dipolar in something like BRE, which will be covered, that is a true phase reversal, which is seen in average referential montage, where there is centrotemporal negativity on surface, and FP2 it is positive. 1 second, I'll show that only. That's more important. Like
another relevant question is, if there is a phase reversal without field, should it be considered pathological?
Phase reversal without field, if it is very focal, you have to really take it with a pinch of salt, because if it is coming from C3, if it is coming from T1, very unlikely that it will be involving only T1. Some field should be there to the adjoining electrode. If we see whole of the record, if I see a single page, then it might be that, okay, I didn't saw that field. But if we see whole of the record, then some field has to be there, except if it is last electrode O1, O2, or if it is the anterior electrode FP1, FP2. So beginning and end of the chain, it is okay. But rest of the areas, very unlikely that it will involve. At least even if it is C3, there is some field to seize it. So some field will be there to the adjoining electrode. So a single electrode, if it is there, it has to be taken that it could be mostly electrode artifact, which is much more common than a single very focal discharge, which is a pathological over there.
If there is no field, it should be considered as artifact.
Yeah, unless proven otherwise.
Otherwise, correct.
Over here, C4 and some field is there to T4, it is going down. And if I change it to average referential montage, we can see over here, centroparietal and some field to temporal. But what we are seeing over here, contralateral FP1 and ipsilateral FP2, there is a positivity which is going down. So that is a tangential dipole. Not exactly this image. It is spreading to central. Over here, W2, it is spreading to W1. Because the positive pole is the other side, it will spread to W3 area, or it will spread to anterior frontal area. This is the true phase reversal, what we see in average montage, when the focus is at the depth of the sulcus, and classical example is in this sort of BRE sort of discharges. I think that's okay.
There are many questions.
Yeah.
I think we can finish few.
Somebody, I think, wanted me to mention the Zeigarnik rhythm again.
Yes.
Somebody do that?
Yeah, I've stopped sharing.
While that is happening, I'll just mention this. So the Zeigarnik rhythm actually is, so if you look at this, the Zeigarnik rhythm is at the center of the head, midline. It's a frontal midline theta rhythm. So what happened was Zeigarnik rhythm was discovered a long time ago. It was discovered way before smartphones and so on and so forth. And this when it was described mostly in drowsy people. But then people discovered that when you're doing sequential tasks, like for example, doing one thing, then doing another thing and so on, or when you're focusing on something, that rhythm again appears. So that was the first evidence that this is not one rhythm, but many different rhythms. And then this paper came out in 2016, and smartphones were not around when Zeigarnik actually first described the rhythm. And this rhythm happened only when you were using the smartphone. And then these people described the similar rhythm only when you are knitting. So obviously, this is not one rhythm. This is not physiologically one type of activation of cortex or one type of resting rhythm that is producing the electrographic picture. A similar electrographic picture is being produced by many different mechanisms. I think the better name for it is just to call it a midline theta rhythm. It's usually frontal, so frontal midline theta is good. But if you really want to confuse somebody and if you really want to look smart, I think calling it Zeigarnik is a good idea.
What is the difference between physiological and pathological beta activity? That's one of the questions.
Okay, so I think it's very difficult to actually measure beta activity, but the beta activity is mostly at the front of the head, and you just get a feel for how much beta activity there is on the EEG. If there is too much beta activity, and this EEG here, I'll try to expand it. This EEG here is an example of too much beta activity. It's not actually over filtering. This actually is beta activity. So this EEG here is an example of too much beta activity. Certain medications like benzodiazepines, antipsychotics, and sometimes phenobarbital can cause a lot of beta activity in the record. So
hello. I'm sorry to interrupt, sir. What you can do is on the right hand side of your file, there is a option of slideshow. You can select that so that the entire image gets expanded.
So if you look at here, this is too much beta. And it's just a qualitative thing. You look at it and you say there is too much beta activity. You worry about whether you have over-filtered it. You worry about whether or not some part of this is muscle artifact. But once you have made up your mind that this is too much beta activity, the most common causes are medications, especially benzodiazepines, antipsychotics, and sometimes barbiturates.
Anand, can I add to it?
Yes, of course.
Sometimes it can happen initial first 1 or 2 page in a young restless patient, you get this sort of beta. So
definitely
this could be there, but usually when they settle down, next few pages later, you get the classical rhythm. So unless you will have to go with the history and rest of the things, in ICU scenario, definitely it will be like this would be some sort of benzodiazepine sort of thing, comatose or unconscious.
I agree. And too much beta, low voltage EEG,
monomorphic,
decreased anterior-posterior rhythm, poor reactivity. Unless they are extremely dramatic, I think you should never call any of these. You should never call an EEG low voltage just because you think it is low voltage. If it is flat, well, it is flat. So you should have a very high threshold for diagnosing some of these conditions, including excessive beta and low voltage activity.
One question is whether RMTD and wicket waves are seen in pediatric age group, and how common is that?
They can be. I think Dr. Yardi, we talked about it. He's going to address it in detail. Okay.
Any use of EEG apart from ruling out seizures in psychiatry? Difficult question to answer here.
Short answer is no. Short answer is no. maybe, if I were to make up something, I could say that increased beta activity might indicate an abuse of benzodiazepines at the most.
Or anxiety.
Or anxiety. But other than that, people have tried to correlate this with schizophrenia, with bipolar disorder, and so on and so forth. And everything has failed. Unfortunately, nothing seems to match up. We just are not able to record the thoughts of a person, which is probably a good thing.
And what is the anterior-posterior gradient and why it happens?
Okay, so we'll go back to the initial image. So if you look at this EEG, if you look at this picture here on the left side, you can see that these are FP1, F7, T3 electrodes. So you can see that, for example, let's consider this chain here, FP1, F7, T3, T501. This is this chain here. So as you go from the anterior side to the posterior side, you will notice that the waveforms change. Here, beta activity is more common. Here, there is a resting rhythm that you call the posterior dominant rhythm. This is low amplitude, this is high amplitude. This is high frequency, this is low frequency. I don't think anybody knows why this exists perfectly, but the most common explanation that you will get is the front of the head, it acts in a very desynchronized fashion. Things are doing separate things. So for example, one thing might be thinking about your wife, one thing might be thinking about your car, and so on and so forth. And all of those things, because they are doing things independently, the voltages don't add up to anything. Instead of that, what you get is this many different thoughts at small voltages. On the other hand, the occipital cortex, when it's not doing anything, it probably has a normal resting rhythm. It probably is going off on its own. And nobody knows the origin of some of these rhythms. So when you do intracranial recordings, for example, the mu rhythm, you can actually see it very beautifully. But some of the other rhythms and these other waveforms that you see on the skull are not very nicely seen on the intracranial EEG. So this entire EEG that you are seeing it through the window of the skull. You are seeing it through the filter of the skull. So these waveforms are just something that we see. And the question of what in the brain these waveforms are representing is not known for most of these rhythms, most of these gradients, and so on and so forth.
One more question is, I think there, what is the basis of alpha blocking, Siddharth?
Alpha?
Alpha attenuation, I mean, what I think, what
alpha attenuation.
What is the electrophysiological basis?
Yeah, if you agree to what people are telling you about it, that when the posterior occipital cortex is not doing much, then all the areas are going off together in a very slow fashion. Then obviously when you're opening your eyes, you are actually seeing something, then those areas are going to be doing different things. One thing might be seeing a bottle, one thing might be seeing a glass, one thing might be seeing some ice, and so on and so forth. And and you're trying to put all of those things together. So when things act in a desynchronized fashion, the amplitudes become lower, the rhythms go away, and the frequency increases, which is what you're seeing here. So as soon as the eyes open, this very nice rhythm that you saw here, as soon as the occipital cortex starts doing something, the rhythm disappears. And that's why it's called the resting rhythm. But again, these are explanations that we ourselves have made up to explain what we are seeing. That doesn't mean that is what is actually going on in the brain.
Dr. Jayantimani has commented on this, that thalamocortical networks are considered basis for alpha in the resting state.
That is true. Certainly there is we know that there is activation of certain areas. For example, sleep spindles also are well studied. The posterior dominant rhythm is somewhat well studied, and so on and so forth. But we know that these are activated during fMRI studies or during other studies. But what does that activation mean? What do these rhythms mean? What does a mu rhythm mean? Which cells are producing this rhythm? How is the interaction between cells summating to produce this rhythm? And so I don't think we know that exactly. EEG still is the study of morphology without understanding too much about what are the physiological changes responsible for that morphology. So for example, in focal cortical dysplasia, in juvenile myoclonic epilepsy, you get this polyspike and wave. We don't know why that should be a polyspike and something else should not be a polyspike. We don't know the exact circuits that cause the polyspike.
We have finished majority of questions. Thank you once again, Dr. Siddharth, Dr. Neeraj. It was a wonderful talk. And thank you, audience. Many have actively participated. There are still all participants are still attending. It's still we crossed the 1.5 hours. Thank you once again. Tomorrow we'll meet again at 5 to 6 with 2 more talks. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sir, we have a few questions. So do you want to take those questions up?